Always News.
Hello and welcome to Old News, the programme and podcast which looks at news stories of the day through the papers of yesterday. Homelessness this week, off the back of recent news that a survey into homelessness on the Isle of Man has garnered 800 responses from members of the public. Quite an issue and concern. Has it always been thus? Well, let's see. We turn to the Manx Sun of Saturday, May the 25th, 1895. Homeless and drunk. Mary Tarden, elderly woman, was charged before his worship of the High Bailiff on Saturday morning with being drunk and incapable in Lord Street on the previous Saturday night. A fine of 2 shillings and sixpence or 6 days imprisonment was imposed. The defendant asked for time to pay the fine, but it was said the defendant had no place of abode, and time was refused. The article goes on, eat, drink and be merry. That is all very well, no doubt in moderation. Eating, drinking and merriment are very good things. But can any one of us, even the best of us, trust himself to be invariably moderate? No, indeed. We are all apt at times to go just a little beyond the mark, and then come headaches and regrets. At such times we can appreciate a friend, one who will stand by us and put us right. And such a friend we invariably find in Holloway's pills. They did not fail our fathers at similar crises, and they do not fail us. It is no fiction, but a well-known fact that Holloway's pills are a certain cure for headaches, biliousness, and all similar troubles. Not, unfortunately, for homelessness, though, as it started out. If we turn to the Isle of Man Times of Saturday, September the 22nd, 1900, a homeless family, painful case, neglect of children. The article is headed. On Tuesday morning, before the High Bailiff of Douglas, Catherine Ackhurst, said to be married woman living apart from her husband, was placed in the dock with her 2 young children, Harriet aged 10 and Thomas aged 3, charged with neglecting and exposing them in a manner likely to be injurious. PC John Farragut, sworn, said, around 12 o'clock last night, I found 2 children in Princess Street wandering about. About half an hour afterwards, I saw them up the Gooseneck Road. The defendant was there in company with a man who she alleges is the father of her children. The man is not her husband. Superintendent Boyd, in your opinion, is it likely to endanger the health of the children to be out in that way? Defendant, they're not sleeping out at night. Witness, I asked if the children had a home to go to. They said they'd slept in a closet attached to Kirkbraden Church last night and the night before that. Defendant, they've been sleeping at Mrs. Critch's. I was not lying down nor drunk. Superintendent Boyd said you're not charged with being drunk. They've been staying at Mrs. Critch's, but she was very drunk. She was having a row with her husband and did not like going in. I intended going there today. The High Bailiff said the offence of exposing children was becoming a serious one. The previous afternoon he'd seen little children running about Athol Street who were not 2 years of age. How they found their homes he could not tell, but he watched them until they found their homes where they remained. These children were tender and required to be looked after. It was most difficult to know what to do in cases of this kind. And the answer was, I think, using the birch, would you believe? But those were the days. The Mona's Herald of Wednesday, May the 6th, 1914. Homeless is the title. How the Poor Live. Before the Mayor, Alderman R. Corlett JP and Mr. G. H. Wood JP at the Douglas Police Court on Friday, Robert Carush and Jane Dawson were brought up in custody on a charge of vagrancy. PC James Comish deposed, this morning around 4:30 I found both prisoners in a shed on Tremode Park. They told me they'd walked from Foxdale. Prisoners are destitute and homeless. Carush admitted what the constable had stated was correct. They were compelled to travel from place to place as they were prohibited from loitering in the streets of the town. He complained that he was unable to work. The Mayor, you should be able to get work at this time of the year. Witness stated that the woman was an unfortunate. Make of that what you will. Superintendent Quillian, and this man has been keeping company with her? Yes, replied witness. Mr. Wood, what is the reason you cannot get work? Carush replied that people would not give him a job. Superintendent Quilliam stated that in response to an appeal made by the prisoner, he had assisted him with his passage to Liverpool. After a few days' absence, prisoner returned to the island and had since lived by begging. Personally, he did not think he wanted work. The male prisoner had 4 convictions recorded against him, 3 for drunkenness and 1 for begging. The female prisoner had been convicted 4 times for drunkenness and 1 for indecent behaviour. The bench fined both prisoners 10 and 6 and costs or 14 days imprisonment. I think we can guess which one happened. In the Examiner of Friday, June the 27th, 1924, a landlord's reward for housing the homeless. Mr. Edward McCartan, motor proprietor and furniture remover, was charged before Messrs. L.I. Kinraid and A.J. Tier JPs on Saturday last with failing to notify the local government board of certain structural alterations to property of which he was the owner. The charge was made at the instance of the Braddon Parish Commissioners, for whom Mr. R.D. Gelling appeared. Mr. Cowley was for defendant. Inspector Farragher of the local government board said that the property in question was a disused woolen mill known as Braddon Mill. When the mill was active, the ground floor had been utilised as offices. These offices had now been converted into rooms for habitation and were occupied by 3 families. The alterations necessary for converting the offices into dwelling houses had been carried out without the sanction of the local authorities. No plans had been submitted to the local government board, nor had the converted premises been thrown open for official inspection before occupation. Witness was quite satisfied that the plans were not in accordance with regulations and would not have been approved. Mr. Cowley urged that the defendant had committed this offence. He realised that it was an offence and would hasten to rectify it by conforming with the regulation and submitting plans for approval quite innocently. It would be recognised by the bench that there was considerable mitigation in the fact that Mr. McCartan was making some sort of attempt to solve the housing problem, though, of course, it was not an adequate provision. A fine of £1 and costs was imposed. He was doing his best and, fell foul of the system. And finally, in the Alabama Times, Saturday, March the 22nd, 1952, problem of the homeless. What is an official social worker to do who suddenly receives a demand for shelter for homeless persons? This problem was the subject of a conference held on Friday between a deputation of the United Council of Christian Welfare and Mr. J.C. Nivison, chairman of the Board of Social Services. Cases sometimes arise of evicted families and others who are stranded without shelter when an immediate provision of accommodation is the only remedy and a grant of money does not meet the need. There is also a demand for temporary accommodation for unmarried mothers who may have been discharged from hospital, have no homes to go to during the period of their convalescence. Those who come into contact with people in distress are constantly being asked to find shelter at very short notice in such cases, and are often at a loss to solve the problem, or are only able to provide an admittedly unsatisfactory solution. Mr. Nivison gave a very patient and sympathetic hearing to the representations of the deputation on this subject and suggested that a modest scheme for dealing with this difficult situation should be worked out and placed before the Social Services Board for detailed consideration. He also suggested that there might be charitably disposed persons who would be willing to provide a house which might be used at least as a temporary measure to gauge the extent of the need. Some sad stories, I think, one way or another. Vagrancy, destitution, homelessness. Whichever way we look at it, it certainly is old news. It would be nice that it wasn't news anymore, but sadly, it seems it still is. Until next week, thanks for listening. Cheerio. You're gonna be yesterday's news.